Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Interact podcast. My name is Josh Hanum. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Interact. And today I'm joined by Dawn Richardson, who is a product education manager at Flowdesk and also has her own business called Tech Savvy Creative and a very cool quiz over there that I came across recently. And so I emailed you and I was like, let's talk about that quiz live. So thanks for being here. And do you want to set us up with what your quiz is about?
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Josh, for having me. Big fan. I've been a user of Interact for many years, and by far my highest performing opt-in. So super excited to talk about this. But my quiz came to be actually because of a pain point, and it was in my DMs, in my emails. I was getting the same question over and over again, and it was, Dawn, I need to buy a new computer, but I have no idea what one to buy. And I support creative entrepreneurs. So I support photographers and graphic designers and wedding venue owners and like a huge gamut. And in the creative industry, some people require more, more power, more guts. And they don't always know what that means and how to get that. So the whole point of my quiz was to answer, what Mac should you buy? I ask questions all about what they do, what software they use, and are they looking for a laptop or a desktop? Are you looking for something that has a built-in monitor? Are you looking for something that's more standalone? I'm asking you all these questions to get them to their result. And my quiz has 12 different answers. It's a little bit of a heftier one, but I want to make sure that I'm tailoring the right answer to the right people. And that's really important to me.
Yeah. I mean, and even beyond that, what I noticed in your quiz is that it's specific to maybe some of those audiences you mentioned, and maybe even beyond that. How did you know, like, what specific questions you would ask to your audience? Because what Mac should I buy could be like, it's a massive thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
it could be for this industry, that industry, it could be for bloggers, it could be for designers. You have a specific subset of the audience beyond just the broad question of like which one should I get. How did you know like the specifics of what your audience would need in regard to like this type of purchase?
Yeah. So when I look at my quiz, so the first question I ask is, are you looking for a laptop or a desktop? Like, because that just puts us into two separate camps. Okay. So that's a very cut and dry. And then I ask them primarily because I'm a former photographer and I support a lot of photographers. Are you a photographer?
Mm.
Because that right there is pretty much going to give me the answer because a photographer requires more RAM, they require a little bit more power. Running the Adobe suite still takes a lot of memory. So here we are. And now with the evolution of AI tools, I want to make sure that you're not buying something that you have to change, and buy a new one in within a couple months or a year. So those are the first two questions I ask. If they say no to being a photographer, I ask more about what they do. Like, do you do podcast producing? Are you a videographer? I'm looking for those things that might trigger somebody that needs more. So I'm trying to get to that solution. Now, regardless of how they answer, whether they're a photographer or whatever they do, I do ask them some other questions that are actually not relevant to their result. Like,
Mm.
do any of these apply to you? And I ask, like, are you in the wedding industry? Are you a speaker or an educator? Have you been in business less than 5 years? Like, those are a couple things that I ask on like a multiple choice type thing. And the whole purpose of that is because I have my Interact quiz directly integrated with Flowdesk, and I'm segmenting my audience based off of that answer. So when somebody says I'm in the wedding industry, I segment them into a wedding industry segment. So if I have a workshop coming up or something that's very valuable, or even the messaging that's relevant to a wedding professional, I now have a warm audience of subscribers that I know are wedding pros. And that allows me to get to the right message to the right person at the right time. So that's really important. So there are a couple of those questions in there that don't necessarily change the trajectory of where they're going to land. But I ask them, one, because I want the quiz to be more than one question sometimes. Like, if you say, like, I want a desktop and I'm a photographer, I pretty much know what your answer is at this point. So adding another question or two just makes it feel a little bit more organic and like the quiz is doing more work. Um, but I also ask things that are relevant to the quiz because, if you look at Apple's iMac lineup, they have different ports. Like some of their iMacs have 2 ports, some of them have 4 ports. So I asked them, how many things are you trying to plug in here? Because if you have 4 things to plug in, we're not going to buy the iMac that has 2 ports. So having to like understand the Apple ecosystem, and especially when they change, sometimes these questions do change and evolve a little bit. But yeah, I would say it's like a hybrid of relevant things to get to the answer, but also things that are beneficial to me and my marketing strategy that help me segment my audience a little bit better.
Yeah. And those questions are like anticipating needs. That's what
Yeah.
I hear in what you're saying. It's like you're asking them about things that you know they might need, that
Hmm.
they might not even think of, which
Yeah.
is kind of the magic of a really good quiz question. It's like, I can demonstrate to you that I understand what you need in the way that I
Yes.
ask the question, which is
Yes.
so like reverse, It's like normally everyone's thinking about how do I like craft my messaging and my copy so that like it resonates with people. But to ask a question that shows that you know what
Hmm.
somebody's thinking about is
Hmm.
like next level. And I think it's like really hard. I'm sure that you deal with this with people that are thinking about making quizzes, but like how did you think through that? Obviously, like you've been doing this a long time, so you kind of knew,
Yeah.
but outside of like, oh, I already know how to do that, what process would you go through if you had to like start from scratch, erase everything, figure out,
Start over.
yeah, like figure out without all of your knowledge, like would you do interviews with customers? Would you like what would you do to get back to that state?
Yeah. So I come from a very unique place. I am a former Apple employee. So I spent a lot of time learning how these machines work and what is valuable to a user. Now, I do want to preface this that I launched the iPhone 4 and the first iPad. So it was a very long
Nice.
time ago. Very long time ago. Times have changed. The Apple ecosystem has evolved incredibly drastically. So that's a part of it. But so understanding like how to ask the right question really came from my time at Apple. What are people using this for? How are they using it in their lives and their businesses? And just really helping me frame my like ask the right questions, like what you said, right? Like I might ask you, do you need an SD card slot? Like, oh, well, if you definitely don't want to use a dongle and an adapter, that MacBook Air is out, like, and we got to talk about it. Like, that's why, so anyway, so that, and then it's always kind of a juggling game. I always call like WWDC and Apple's keynotes like my Super Bowl, because I know that as soon as Apple has one of these keynotes, I'm going through like, I gotta redo this. Like my quiz is going to evolve and adapt. And Josh, I know like you jumped onto one of my wait lists because Apple released 3 new Macs like
Yep.
in the last few weeks, and I was like, like was not expecting that today. I have to go update my quiz. But a lot of it's research, and a lot of it is just like understanding how certain primary applications that businesses use work on the ecosystem. So I know that a photographer is going to be leaning heavily into the Adobe Suite. The Adobe Suite has always been known to be a bit of a memory hog. The Adobe Suite is now introducing AI features that require more and more power. So that helps me kind of like really craft it. It's very rare that my answers change drastically with an update. It still tends to be pretty consistent. And yeah, it's just a little bit of a game of like researching what's new. Do I need to make changes? At the end of the day, it's normally just an update. I need to refresh the imagery. I need to refresh the specs, what's available. Um, but it tends to be pretty consistent. The photographer is almost going to always get a MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it is what it is at the end of the day. I know that sky blue color in that MacBook Air is really beautiful. But if you want to run a business on your computer, guess what? We need a little bit more power. And I'm going to tell you why. And that's a big part of my quiz too, is where it goes after the fact, which is like landing pages that explain that.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing and what you're saying there is like a deep expertise, because I remember the iPhone 4. I was buying and selling electronics back then, so
Yeah.
the iPhone 4, I remember,
Remember the antenna gate?
yeah, you're
When you
like,
held the
oh
phone
yeah,
wrong and
that
you
was
lost your
wild.
service? You
Yeah,
learned a
those
lot about
things.
customer service during that.
Yeah, actually, the iPhone 4 was not. No one wanted it on the secondhand market,
Nope.
because of that. Even once it was fixed, everyone like thought it was still that. So I
Yeah.
guess I actually sold more iPhone 3s than 4s.
The bumpers.
But yeah, but it's been it's been a good stretch of time. And what that tells me is it's more of a deep expertise thing, which is interesting. Maybe if you flip over to your Flowdesk hat, you have a insight on this one. But from
Hmm.
what I've observed, I sometimes see people almost afraid of leaning into their deep expertise when they're thinking about a quiz idea.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I already think about that too much, or like, it's overplayed. And I'm like, it's not though, because just like what you said, you've been doing this forever and you know exactly what people need, but it still has to update over time. And
Hmm.
like, I think you can do the same thing really with anything. Like, if you're a thought leader and
Yeah.
you have one core concept that you talk about, like Brene Brown, not a customer, but like if she was to do a quiz about shame,
Hmm.
then that's just like something she's been talking about forever. But it would,
Right.
of course, update as she does new research. Do you see
Yeah.
that when people are like thinking about quiz ideas, like they want it to be something like new and novel, and they like shy away from the thing that they're actually like a deep expert at?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's for a lot of different reasons. One,
Hmm.
it's that like imposter syndrome of who am I to say that I am the expert? Who am I to give those suggestions? And I think we often discredit how much expertise we do have, like exactly what you said, right? But I also think that's something important to remember as business owners, as educators, and what I've seen is that you got here through your own experiences. And that is something that's new to other people. So even though you might not feel like you've made it to the end, that doesn't make your expertise, your insight less valuable. Okay. And
Hmm.
I often have to like take a step back because sometimes I feel like something as simple as like explaining what the difference between memory and a hard drive is, like explaining the difference between that might feel really basic to some people, but to other people, getting a like having a way of maybe seeing that from a different perspective with like a different analogy can be so powerful because all of a sudden they understand why. They understand why this is important. You're not going to go buy a four-seater car when you have 8 people in your family, right? Like, same thing. If I need a computer that's going to run these supersized apps, I'm not going to buy a computer that has really like small amount of memory, things like that. So I try to link it to things that make sense to them. But honestly, and this is just any territory, any educator, quiz or not. But I think we all just kind of have to lean in to our experience and remember how valuable that is. And you also have to remember that nothing is permanent, right? Like the quiz was an experiment to see if it would land well, if it would answer the questions that I didn't want to answer one on one all the time. And it worked really well. And it's evolved a lot since I launched it in 2021. It's been years, but it's evolved over time. But that's exactly the point. What are the questions that people are still asking me when they get those results? Okay, that question has come up 3 times. Maybe I should add that to my email that I send out after. Maybe I should add that to my landing page. And just evolving and growing with the quiz is really important. But again, my piece here, just do it. If you don't
Hmm.
like it, pull it down.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing out there that's keeping like it's permanent. We evolve, we adapt. But just remember that sometimes people need to hear your perspective and your expertise, and that's really valuable.
Yeah, and it is kind of like a product. Like what you're
Mhm.
describing there is like a product development process. So like, okay, getting this feedback, okay, add that in. Now there's this feedback, get that in. And then sometimes products just like aren't right, or they're
Yeah.
not like that needed. People ask you all these questions over DMs, but it's not the right fit for a quiz because they don't feel comfortable using a quiz to answer that question.
Yeah.
They want to talk to you. And in those cases, it's like, cool. Well, that's not the right concept to do a
Right.
quiz on. I need to, continue, or maybe I need to staff up to answer that question with a human being, something like that.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Something that I picked out as you were talking there, and you mentioned AI maybe before we recorded. So you're talking about how you have kind of dove into that world. But do you see opportunities beyond the quiz where like people ask you these follow-up questions to create content that's specific
Oh.
to like the areas where, okay, everybody answers this question this way, which means they are still wondering about that. So then you can create content that even
Mhm.
potentially gets picked up by ChatGPT so that then ChatGPT can send people to you. Is that something you've like delved into?
Yeah, I have played with it a little bit. I've built my own GPT, and I was attempting to make
Oh.
my own GPT like answer like my quiz would. My quiz worked way better. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
My quiz was just a lot more black and white, cut and dry, and it got people to the right answer every time. And I really appreciated that about it. But I would say yes, like those follow up questions. Can we dive in to create content? Can I use that to create a blog post? Can I use it to create a YouTube video? Can I create an email series based off of that Instagram post? Like whatever it is, use that to feed my content strategy. But I don't think it's only the follow-up questions. Like those are important. But I also think the questions that are even within the quiz are valuable pieces of content. So I ask them about software they use. So content about why having the right hardware matters to your software, like how those things work together is really valuable content. Talking about the difference between a processor, your memory, and your hard drive. That is relevant content, even though the quiz is kind of telling them what they need and why they need it. But let's talk about what this actually means. So just taking this quiz and dissecting it backwards even further, creating content from that, because all of that content, when you look at my Instagram posts that talk anything about a computer, they all point to my quiz at the end. I'm using it to funnel people into my quiz, which then leads down a path of a marketing strategy, email strategy, and so on. So
Yeah.
yes, for sure, but not just the follow-up questions. Just dissect the questions you already have and use that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I would imagine it has to be the case that like every single time you're answering one of those questions of like a processor versus RAM, like it's in the context of your audience and like their
Oh,
specific
yes.
needs, like photographers, right? Like why does it
Yes.
matter that you have a certain size hard drive as a photographer
Mhm.
specifically? Because then
Mhm.
you're getting like these hyper specific answers, which it seems to me we've just started to delve into this research on our end, but it seems like the new like AI SEO is going to be more about hyper specific answers to questions
Mhm.
instead of like what is a hard drive, because like
Yeah.
you're not going to stand out in that world if ChatGPT can give you a broad answer to that. It's not going to reference your article. But if it's like for photographers or even like more specific like wedding photographers, like
Mhm.
here's why it matters to them. And to your
Yes.
point, it is, I also wanted to, harp back on this because you mentioned this earlier, like the fact that we think everybody knows everything because we know it
Mhm.
is really fascinating. And I think that maybe you've seen this. I think a lot of people get stuck on like, oh, this is not a good enough idea to put out a post about or write a blog about or whatever because it's too basic.
Mhm.
But to your audience, it's not. And if
Yeah.
anything, like it also helps you get reps in of like creating
Oh, yeah.
content. So it's
Exactly.
like,
Like, how they say that like people have to see something or hear something so many times before they start to actually digest it. Like that
mm,
applies to your education as well. Like as many times as I might have repeated myself, as many times as I say, go update your software, I still remind them and I still get people that are like, what? Like, I don't want to. Or like, I harp on people to close their tabs and people get very offended when I tell them to close their tabs. But I will continue to tell them to close their tabs because they need that reminder. It's something, again, so basic to me. Like I might understand the why to close your 400 tabs, but to them, they just see that like I'm just trying to ruin their fun. And so like reaching out to them, explaining like, hey, this is, that spinning beach ball of doom that you have there. Well, let's look at your Chrome tabs and your 4 Adobe Suite apps open, and then we'll talk about it and see if it's actually your computer that's the problem or if it's how your behavior is. Like, so leaning into that, even if you make it fun and approachable. And I think how you do it with your messaging is really important. Like you said, Josh, like if a really techie person, a Best Buy Geek Squad guy landed on my blog, he'd probably laugh at me. Like I'm not trying to talk to that person. Okay. I am not trying to talk to that person that probably knows even more about how a processor and the Apple Silicon is working. But my goal is to talk to an audience that literally doesn't even want to open their laptop because they're afraid they're going to break it. I talked to somebody who bought a Mac, who left it in the box for 2 weeks, for a coaching session with me before she even turned it on. This audience is intimidated by technology. They don't want to mess it up. They don't want to be at fault. It's a very different audience than somebody that's posting tech blogs. So be really confident in who you're talking to at the same time, who your messaging is for, and lean into that. Because again, that most basic conversation that you feel is basic, like maybe I've said this too many times, will be the first time somebody sees that conversation, will be that repetition that they need to really start to understand the concept that you're teaching them in a way that makes sense to them. And that is so important.
Right. And that knowledge of your audience to know those anecdotes that you just provided, and it's
Mhm.
different for every audience, but to know where they're coming from, I think that's going to become more valuable than the
Mhm.
Geek Squad, like knowing all the stats, because with AI, you can know all of that instantly. If you just
Mhm.
ask the AI, it'll tell you.
Yeah.
And what it doesn't know, though, is like, who are you? Are you the person that leaves the laptop in the box? Because if it's telling you, like, oh, here's how to install whatever apps, and
Yeah.
you're like, no, 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 like, I was actually asking you how to take it out of the box. Like, it's like
Exactly.
those classic, hilarious tech support, stories where it's like the printer's not working, and
Mhm.
in reality, the Wi-Fi wasn't working, and the reason why the lady thought that, or the man thought that the printer wasn't working, was because they email stuff to someone else and they print it out. So then they say the printer's not working. What they really mean is the Wi-Fi is not working. So it's like
Right.
knowing that stuff
Yeah.
is, I think, like hyper valuable in comparison to like the hard statistics, because
Yeah.
now we all have the hard statistics. On the point though of following up and telling people things many times, that kind of parlays into like the sequences that you have after the
Mhm.
quiz, and then just more broadly in your experience. I'm wondering if you have a number in your head of how many times people have to be reminded of things, because
Mm.
it always changes. Like it always was like, oh, 7, but I
Yeah.
think it's probably higher now.
Yeah.
So how do you handle that in your follow-up emails when
Sure.
somebody takes your quiz, and also just like in life when you're doing education stuff?
Yeah. I don't know if I have a set number. I've
Mhm.
never thought about like a direct number. My goal is to always communicate the right message at the right time. So if it's appropriate to remind them to close their tabs or to update their software, I want to make sure that message is clear. Now, with this being part of the Apple ecosystem, there are some very definitive times where the conversation is going to come up. When new versions of Mac OS release, when new versions of iOS release, like that is a common conversation amongst the ecosystem. That is a great time for me to reiterate. I'm going to take advantage of the current events to lean into that conversation. And that always spurs conversations, because that is the first time of like, oh, do I really need to do it? Or you get the people that are like, I can't update because I don't have enough space on my phone. Like that spurs a whole list of other conversations there. But I want to meet them where they are. And that comes with like really strategic email marketing and using segmentation. Um, like really tagging them based off of what they're clicking on. If I see somebody is clicking on my blog posts about how to keep their files organized, how to run routine maintenance on their computers, and I'm segmenting my audience based off of what blogs and stuff they're clicking on, that tells me what information they're looking for. That also helps me drive, do I need to launch a product that might support them in that process? So it's like a much bigger thing. But back to your question, is there a set number of times? No, but I do try to make it an intentional point that whenever a current event is related to a particular topic, I'm going to repeat. I'm going to repeat the strategies, send the reminders, because everybody's updating their computer. Like, here's what to do before you update your Mac OS. Like, let's talk about your backups. Let's talk about these things. And unfortunately, with computers, something that's a little bit more of a different topic here is when somebody has something go wrong. That's when I tend to like people find me a lot after their hard drive fails, or after they lost somebody's wedding photos, or after they've lost all of, their family's files on their computer. Um, those unfortunately are really hard conversations. but it leads to real life examples of why we can't just assume that tech is going to be there all the time. It's a lot of times it's tech failure. A lot of times it's other things that are out of our control, but 90% of the time it's human error. It's a toddler pulling your computer off of your desk. It's a hard drive hitting the tile. It's somebody's car getting stolen. Your laptop's in the backseat. Like, it's so many different things that we have to be aware of. And all of those conversations also lead back to that same narrative. Whenever something like that pops up, when SanDisk goes down because all of their drives are suddenly failing, now is the time to talk about it. You're hearing about it in the news. You're hearing about it because Apple's talking about it. Let's talk about what this means to you as a creative. Let's talk about it in a language that's maybe more friendly and approachable. And I'm going to hit that every time that those current events make it relevant again.
Mm. A lot of this is revolving around this like idea of approachable and meeting people where they are, which
Yeah.
is both like it's just like so hard to do. Like 'cause you really have to be able to read minds. Like it's tough.
Mhm.
How like tying it back into the quiz, I'm just curious because now I'm thinking about the title of your quiz. Like
Yeah.
how how do you craft that to be approachable? Because like it is about, I mean, I guess it's answering a question that people have and that they ask you all the time, but
Yeah.
it's still kind of a daunting thing of like it's a big purchase. I mean, I don't know where it ranks exactly, but I would imagine it's like house, car, computer. It's like your three
Yeah.
most
Pretty high up there.
expensive things. It's crazy. So it's like, I mean, it's not crazy, but like this is an expensive purchase. So how did you think about that in the context of like crafting a quiz experience that doesn't
Mhm.
overwhelm people or make them feel like not smart or something?
Yeah. So, I mean, this goes back to my branding in general. At Tech Savvy, when we launched, I wanted it to be a very fun, approachable, different perspective of technology that wasn't the norm in the industry. There's a lot of like what I call like bro tech out there. There's like a lot of the YouTubers and the reviewers, and like I'm huge fans of many of them. So, love that. But that's not everybody's cup of tea. They don't want to watch a review on YouTube all the time. That's a little bit more wordy and jargony. They just want to understand, if I'm going to make this investment, is this the right investment? And they don't want to feel like they're being judged in the process of asking the questions. And that was what my whole goal with Tech Savvy was: friendly, approachable, a little fun, a little quirky, just so they felt safe to ask those questions. They felt like it was a safe place where they could learn and actually utilize this technology. So a couple of things to answer your question. The first thing was, is I really wanted to like silo down my audience because I, I've been part of the Apple ecosystem for years. I can't support the PC users as well. So I wanted to make it very clear that this is a quiz to find what Mac. If you are not interested in buying a Mac, this is not your quiz. Okay. So I try to make that very clear in the title there. And it was also a decision I made. I surveyed my audience pretty early before I built my quiz, and about 95% of my audience were Apple users. So I already knew that I had a solid group of my user base that this applied to. So that was some research I did beforehand. That was really important. But I want to make sure that happens. Now, I want to make the question super simple. I don't want people to be confused by the question. So that was important. But another piece to this that I think is really important is the opt in at the end. Now, controversial opinion here. I enable the ability to skip the opt in. And this is a big piece for me. And this is one reason why I love Interact, is because I have the ability. They can skip giving me their email and go straight to the answer. One, this builds trust. And normally people will do it and then they'll come back and do it again because they're trying to see what their laptop version would be. And at that point, I get their email address because I built trust, right? They got to the landing page. The landing page is very simple. It's fun, it's colorful, but it explains what the difference between a USB A and a USB C is. It explains why you need more memory and why, as a photographer, you need X, Y, and Z because of these are the apps that you use. You want a memory card slot. This is why you have to have this computer. Like, I explain all of that on that landing page. My goal in this whole thing is just to build that trust. I want them to know that I know what I'm talking about, and that's what the landing page helps me do here. But I also want them to know that I'm not just out for their money. I'm not out for their pocket. I want them to have a great relationship with technology. I want them to feel confident. And to me, by allowing them to get the answer to their problem without requiring their opt-in, their email address is a big part of that trust factor. And even though I still get 50% conversions on it. So even though it's, I give people the skip, the people that want to be there are there. And for my email marketing strategy, that's great. I don't want junk emails in my email marketing platform. So it's been a win-win-win across the board, building trust. I've established myself as an expert. People recommend my quiz when people are on a Facebook group being like, I don't know what Mac to buy. My quiz gets posted all the time. And that's really powerful. Connecting with people where they are, giving them the resources that they need to feel confident in their decisions. And when they're the right audience, they are welcomed with open arms into my community. But yeah, so
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I tell everybody very forcefully to leave that skip on.
yes.
I think that it forces you, because what's interesting in the statistics is that the conversion rate is imperceptibly different
Mhm.
between leaving it on and off.
Yeah.
Because I think that people that leave it on are forced to create a better quiz.
Mhm.
And so, all things considered, it's probably a lot higher if you forced it every time.
Mhm.
But because there's a bias towards quality for the people that leave the skip on, I think that's why it ends up being similar.
Mhm.
Because you do get a bunch of people that just put in their email to see the results if you force it.
Yeah.
And because you are like seeing these numbers come through, I think people get a little lazy with the quality of their quiz content. And, you have to let people have their autonomy. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a real connection. Like, because what you're trying to do with the quiz is create a connection. It's like, what kind
Yeah.
of connection is this? This is crap. Like, I don't want to be forced to do something. Like, that sucks. I don't want to do that.
Well, and the whole point is to help them, right?
Right.
Like the whole point isn't to get their email address. I mean, in a business way, like that's the goal, and we want to be able to market to them or whatever.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I want to be a resource for people. I want to answer their question, and that's the best way to do it. If they're the right people, they'll join my list. If they're just there because they want answers, I'm glad I could help somebody today. And that's what
Yeah, and
matters.
it's interesting that you're saying like the multiple time quiz taker, and
Yeah.
what you were saying about, you're educating them specifically on why you recommended the thing that you recommended to them. So
Mhm.
it's like, here's your thing, and then here's all the reasons why I think it's good for you as a
Mhm.
person, like you individually.
Yes.
And that's like super powerful, and everybody wants to read that because it's like, oh, it's about me. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. Everyone's interested in themselves, and so you're actually winning them over through that, and
Mhm.
then they can go back through it. Or like, I've seen people even just drop another Flowdesk form on that landing page of like,
Mhm.
if you want to learn more, whatever, you can have that there as well. Then you'll capture those people that
Mhm.
were not quite sold the first time, but now
Yeah.
that they've read this, they're like, great. And that's like, it's such a thing, like personalized education. It's like
Mhm.
massively powerful. It's like, it's so much more helpful. And so
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
glad that you mentioned that, because it's a big thing.
Yeah.
Big
Well,
thing.
when you talk about segmentation and that personalization of education, like my example when I talk about my quiz, my email marketing strategy, well, every answer leads to a segment. So I can tell you exactly who's MacBook Pro, who's a Mac or Mac Studio, like so on, so on. Well, when Apple releases a new MacBook Air, guess who's getting an email?
Hmm.
I have an audience that I know got that as a result. So that applies to them. That new information is relevant to them. And now I have this audience that I can share the news with, maybe in a friendlier way, maybe in a less intimidating way than The Verge or whatever it might be. That really helps them, like, hey, maybe are you still in the market for a MacBook Air? Now's a really good time to buy. They just released a new one, and having that, like, hey, I got your back, like, as part of your like strategy. Like, one, I want to authentically like help people and show up for them, but that also helps me show up and build my trust factor as a business. People are more likely to buy from me. They're more likely to book a mentoring session with me. And that's really important part of having a successful business.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's just shocking how many people don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like fairly anti-technology. I'm not on like any email list, but I would be if
Yeah.
they like sent me stuff that was relevant to me. But big brands or like big companies that I enjoy their products don't do it. And so I'm like, I don't want to get like your 5 emails a week about all this
Yeah.
random stuff. Like if you would just send me the ones that are interesting to me, then yeah, I'd want to hear from you. So that's what you have set up. And it's like, well, yeah, of course. Like, I'm a Mac user. I have a MacBook Pro. Like, if somebody sent me an email, I'll get, though I will get your emails now, but like, I get an email every time they come out. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, it's been whatever amount of years. I've been thinking about maybe getting the new one. I
Mhm.
see that you highlighted the new features that are relevant to me. That's cool. Like, I'm interested in that. I'm
Yeah.
not interested in getting an email that contains like every product. I don't have time to read
Right.
through that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then meeting them where they are. So, like, let's say I send the email saying, "Hey, new MacBook Pro is here," but then in that email, having a conversation of, "Do you really need to upgrade?" Because my 2021 MacBook Pro is still kicking it. Like, we're good here. Like, and having that honest conversation, like, again, I'm not working for Apple. Like, I'm not trying to like sell these MacBooks here. Like, I'm trying to help you make the right decision as a business owner. Now, I want to make sure that you know that this is going to be an expense that's probably going to be required every 5 years or so. Like, that's average lifespan. Still trying to figure out what the lifespan with these Apple Silicon machines are because the M1s are still just like kicking it. They're amazing. But having that honest conversation, like, yeah, it's new and shiny, but do you really need it? Like, are you experiencing these problems? Are you having this? Is this a file management problem, or is this actually your computer's getting old problem? And meeting them there. So not only am I like giving them information, but I'm helping them make an informed decision about what they're going to do next. Again, building that trust factor. I become a valuable resource in their lives. They're likely to open emails from me. And when I have something to offer them, I'm much more likely to be successful in converting that offer into money for my business and revenue. And it's all about those relationships and just helping people. And that's why we do what we do to begin with. Like, we do because we are passionate about something, we have something to offer, and we want to make a living doing it. And that's how I do it here.
Right. It's like the hero's journey. They're the hero. You're the guide.
Mhm.
And you just help them get where they're trying to go. And if you can be that, I think there's a really good point that you brought up about like, should you be buying one? Like, yes, it's very cool. And if you want to, by all means, but like, do you need to? I think
Yeah.
that's a really trust building factor of like
Yeah.
not just always trying to say, yes, 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 do it, do it, do it, do it. Because then, I think this is actually something, this is an entirely different subject, but I think it's something that I see in like the influencer economy that's potentially going to be like a big problem soon, which is like a lot of influencers who are building their brands based on brand deals. They're just
Mhm.
constantly selling stuff.
Yeah.
And at some point, the audience is going to lose trust because it's like, well, I get that you need to make a living by selling stuff, but if you're always telling me that this is the best this and this is the best this and this is the best this, like
Yeah.
kind of stop believing you at some point. And so you
Yeah.
have to balance it and have some realism in it. So it's really important. It's really important. Um, as we wrap things up here, where can people learn more? I mean, from your
Yeah.
website and then also the work that you do at Flowdesk,
Yeah.
so people can kind of see everything that you've talked about like in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at techsavvycreative.com. You can find my quiz at techsavvycreative.com/quiz. So go check that out. Even if you just want to lurk and see how it works, go check it out. Like, I love that. Put an email address in there, get the email. It's a beautiful Flowdesk email. See what it's all about. But that's where you can primarily find me. I do talk about Flowdesk on Tech Savvy Creative, and I have like a little landing page for Flowdesk. So if you want to learn more about Flowdesk and how email marketing can help transform your business, you can find that info there as well.
Nice. Well, thanks so much. This is a really
Yeah.
enlightening conversation and like I got a lot out of it. I always turn these into blog posts afterwards when I have time to like decompress and think about all
Oh,
of it.
yeah.
So thanks for providing us with lots of good stuff here.
Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you for having me and letting me share my story.
Awesome.